Thank you. Good evening. Good evening to day 3 or night 3 of Films Representation Film Festival. And to be honest, never like tonight. It feels like a really special occasion to be gathering all together in a cinema. I was saying to some friends and peers just before that these months were very complicated in order to gain that trust, to bring people back. And of course today we heard about these new restrictions. So I'm very grateful that you are all here today to celebrate something that is the cinema of the real from an Italian perspective. But really, if we look at the history of each of the filmmakers that we presented today, we also discover and intercept anything but like, you know, an Italian perspective on this cinema that is the center, the heart of films representation, a festival that wants to foregrounds that cinema that cares about the relationship between aesthetics and politics. And tonight we have a master of this field, who is Gianfranco Rosi, and I will spend a few words about Gianfranco vision of cinema before going on stage with Rosi. But please allow me to say a few thank you, because this tonight also happens thanks to the support of MUBI, of the Italian Culture Institute in London, and also, and more importantly, about Rai Cinema, that in the person of Paolo Del Brocco and Gabriele Genuino, that are here in this room, are doing an amazing job in Italy for this kind of cinema, producing and distributing and presenting this kind of cinema. Gianfranco, we could say a lot of things about Gianfranco, and we will try to say a lot of things about Gianfranco Rosi tonight. But I would like to say that Gianfranco is a director that formed himself in US. He, in fact, is Italian with an American passport as well. He studied in New York for 20 years. And he started to make his first film in 1992 in India, in Benares, Boatman. And then he moved around. He went back to US, where he made 2 films, Below Sea Level and El Sicario, on both sides of the border between US and Mexico. Then for some reason he decides, reasons that perhaps he will share with us, he decides to go back to Italy to investigate Rome, investigate Sicily, Lampedusa, migrants. And then he went to Middle East with Notturno, which is a film that we will present tonight after this talk that myself and Gianfranco Rosi will have on stage. Gianfranco is one of the few filmmakers in history that has won the Golden Lion in Venice for Sacro GRA in 2013, if I'm not wrong, and then Fire at Sea, Golden Bear, and he was the first documentarian to win a Golden Lion in Venice, at Venice Film Festival with Sacro GRA. So please put your hands together to welcome Gianfranco Rosi. Please, take your time. Gabriele. So, basically just a bit of housekeeping. We will keep the lights a bit down just to create, like, you know, a very cozy, comfortable environment, hopefully a fertile ground for a meaningful conversation. But please feel free to interrupt us if you have any questions, comments. There will be a moment where we will come to you as well for your questions about Gianfranco's cinema. And I will use the support of some clips throughout this talk that will last approximately 75 minutes to underpin what we will be saying about this amazing, outstanding career that spans for almost 30 years, Gianfranco, no?
With only 6 films.
With only 6 films, absolutely.
Not such a good result.
Well, I could say that there is definitely a desire of pursuing the essential and the necessary in cinema that definitely belongs to your vision of cinema. But let's start. Let's have a plan. Let's start from the beginning, from Boatman. In 1993, I was wondering what kind of urgency you felt that led you to Benares, to India. What were you looking for? Not only as a filmmaker, but as an individual, because your cinema is embedded in encounters, in relationships. So I was wondering what brought you there.
Well, now it's been, how many years it's been since Boatman? Maybe 30 years.
28.
28 years. And I'm sure nobody saw Boatman in this room. 3 people, 4 people, 5. So I will have to talk tonight about film that nobody saw it.
But that's why we have some
That's
clips.
why we are here. Yeah. And then you're all forced to see the film, which is my last film. So since Boatman till Notturno, it was like I would say a journey. It was a long journey where I was a filmmaker, a student. I was a student at NYU. I was thinking to become a fiction director, like everybody when they do film school. They think that that's what they want to do. And I always felt very uncomfortable on telling my story before, having to write it, having to have a producer, having to cast, having to do the main work I had. And I said there must be a way of making cinema without telling the story before to anyone. And then one day I saw a film of Ross McAwee. And I saw this man going just with a camera in a very free way and detecting images and telling a story as a one-man crew. And I said, this is the way I want to do my work, to be like a writer and to find my story while I'm passing by life somehow. And that's how Boatman started. I did a short film for NYU. It was a short film I did in Miami. It was a film that was about old people. Miami at that time was a place where people were going to die somehow. Now it's a completely different place, but that was the time where people went to Miami to retire and to have a comfortable climate and go there and waited for death. And I did a 5-minute film where there was this contact with water, almost like a blessing in the morning. There were like this celebration almost of life and death. And I did this short film, and someone told me, it looks like Benares. I didn't know what Benares were. I heard about Benares, and then I started inquiring about Benares. And Benares was a place where people go to die. So I thought to make a film somehow that was complementary to my short film I did in the States. And I took my camera and I went to Benares and I started this long journey which lasted. There are many theories about this film. Some people say 3 years, some people say 5 years, some people say 6 years. I never say how long it took, but it was a hell. It was like 60 millimeter, no budget, no idea of what I was going to do. That was the time where documentary was somehow breaking up in the sense of ethnographic film from Jean Rouch and Gardner and all the stories of from Magermead, where there was a different approach. And I didn't know what documentary was. For me, my aim was always cinema and telling story. And I went with this camera, and I arrived in Benares. I was 25 at the time. And I encountered death for the first time in Benares. I remember when I arrived there was some clash between Muslim and Hindu. I arrived at this airport. There was no car to take me to this hotel. And someone told me just wait for a car to go there. The only car that was going there was like a car carrying dead bodies. And I remember entering this little place with family, and inside there was a dead body. And this was the first time I saw in my life a dead body. Just to imagine how our society is facing the taboo of death. And there I searched this place where it's the only place in the world where dead people and alive people crossing the same path. And start this process of going around with my camera every day for 2-3 months. And I was not able to film a single frame. And just at the end of this journey, where I was trying to capturing something which was impossible, I decided to leave my equipment in my hotel, and I went to the river and I said today I want to be like a tourist. And I met this man whose name is Gopal. He became the main character of Boatman, and I spent it with him the whole day. And then went back to the hotel. I thought this has to be the film, like the journey on this river, with no really any thing to demonstrate, just following this man on this river and try to capture the essence of this culture, which was so far away from me. And the next day I went there with my camera, I found him, and I started filming him. And this journey lasted 4, 5, 6 years, and the film basically is a result of these 4, 5 years which condense the idea of that day when I met him, the day I spent it with him. And there somehow is where I start thinking and understanding how I wanted to make film. This encounter.
This encounter is very, very interesting because, of course, we'll give you the chance to think about your cinema, and we actually have a clip that might lead very nicely and organically in what you are saying, because then we can explore a lot of
otherwise I feel like a crazy guy talking
exactly.
at the center of the park.
So maybe if we can go with the first clip that exactly we'll take from that moment where Gianfranco meets Gopal and goes on this boat and meets his boatman.
Why? This is Hindu system. Every time European ask why? Why very young marriage? Why young dead body thrown the river? Big dead body fire? Why every time people coming this river take bath? One time one European asked me, why the Indian people use toilet paper? Look how crazy. I'm to my thinking, you know. Yeah, this system coming, Hindu system, long way. It's no new system. Why every time ask?
So basically, Gianfranco, this is your first film. And clearly also
and this is where I learned not to ask questions.
I feel that there is a lesson from me here. But let me ask a question, if I may.
My teacher used to say, my mentor used to say, you ask one question, you have one answer. You have 100 questions, you have 100 answers, and this is not interesting. You have to come out with something which is so profoundly intimate that somehow is the synthesis of life. And that's what I learned somehow on this film, where my voice disappeared. I never ask any more questions, and I start just following this boat and this boatman through this journey. And this journey is always a stratification of memory. Is that limit? Is that border? Is that border that we cannot see, we cannot perceive, but is always there. And that somehow became the theme of all my film, you know, this invisible border which is on the limit of a frame, and somehow is the margin of the frame is always a margin of life and the margin of history somehow. And that's what you have always to cover when you start filming, all these elements that are very imperceptible for me.
I have a bad news for you. I may have some questions throughout the night, so I will try to start with some relation to these two. No, jokes aside, is you talk about frame, you talk about finding the right measure. Your cinema is very precise in composition and very precise in the research of the measure between you and the subject that you frame, or the subjects or the community that you talk to, that you interact, that you live with. So I was wondering if, even looking at this scene, no, how did you find, if you can talk us through the process of finding that right measure, because for you it was your first film, so I guess that you didn't know much about cinema, the language of cinema back then.
No, I didn't know much about the language of cinema, but I learned in this film, and this film is shot in 16 millimeter, so the whole, in all these years, 3, 4, 5, 6 years that I spent there with the idea of creating this one day from morning till evening. It was all shot in 16 millimeter. It was extremely expensive to film, to shoot it with 16. So I had only 9 hours. The whole film was shot with 9 hours of footage, and then the film is like 50 minutes. So there was an extremely sense of really be park and make choices constantly. And I always ask myself, how can you tell a story? How can you investigate pain, any kind of intimacy, without the use of the language of cinema? And that for me what became very important, always the use of the language of cinema. When someone asks me what's the difference between documentary and cinema, for me it's not important that. For me what is important is what's the difference between true and false, is the difference between a narration, is where do you find that element of narration which become universal. And this for me was always my search in my work, to find that universal element, to be able to transform reality. We have so much information on a daily life. We live in a moment where we click a button and everything is there, everything is available. And I think, and I thought already at that time that a structure to try to find a narrative tool was very important. And the narrative tool for me was about transformation of a place and subtraction of information. But in order to do this, you have to be able to create a synthesis, something which is extremely, that give life to what is left over, that what is not there. And then when it's possible, that's the moment where frame is right. And I think you find this only with the distance. The distance for me is the truth in documentary, where you put your camera. And that's for me is the first element that I learned in this journey with Gopal. I had a fixed camera. My camera was always in my knee, and that lens, that viewfinder became somehow a way of discovering a world which I couldn't see just with my eyes. So putting my eyes inside there, having this frame, telling the story that I wanted to, that I was searching, because all my films are never written before. So all happening in that moment is like a biologist. Now the word biologist is very in fashion, but still is an old method of looking inside a microscope and discover a world that we cannot see with our eyes. And for me, the relationship I have with the camera is I put in my eye inside, and in that moment I'm able to acquire information that I cannot have when I see things without the camera. So all my process of writing and telling a story is start really on this movement where the eyes is there, and where you can find that frame, and that frame has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Has to have a storytelling, that frame. Has to include what you don't see. It has to include what you have in your back. Has to include what you left over, during the editing. For me, making film is about missing things. It's not about gaining things. Most of the time when I start a film, from Boatman, I was months there. I spent a lot of time without a camera, and that's for me the most important moment, because only without the camera I can understand which are the absolute that I want to cover. Allowed me to encounter people, because without encounter my film doesn't exist, and allowed me somehow to gain trust. And I remember also in Middle East, when I was there for 3 years, the first 6 months I was there without camera, and that was a very fundamental moment, to be in a place where you are not forced to film, where that camera doesn't become a divisor, because no matter what, the camera is an element of divisor. I don't accept the fact of cinema du réel, cinema of observational, cinema of be truth with your camera. When the camera is there, everything changes. It changes your relationship with the person. It changes your relationship with the reality. So I don't believe of objectivity. I always believe that the camera has an incredible power to transform things in something else. And that's what I have to capture, that transformation. And that transformation can be captured only with the language of cinema, and with the tools that cinema give us, and with an enormous work of subtraction, of taking off, and creating that moment which, as I was saying before, becomes the synthesis of life and becomes universal somehow.
Well, and you touched on points that, of course, will be then throughout your career very important anchors for your cinema. One of which is intimacy. One of which is being able to shoot only when you feel that there is something essential to record, to register. And in this sense, I would love to move on to Below Sea Level, no? Below Sea Level, together with the Sicario, represent your North American production. Below Sea Level, as I said at the beginning, in 2008, was your foray into this community of outsiders that decide to decide. It's an important aspect that you want also to investigate in Below Sea Level. Decided to live outside society, Slab City, a group of people that, I guess, without intimacy, without trust, and more importantly, cinema is the treatment of time. The time that you allow yourself to be with these people, and now you treat them time through cinema. So I would
and the gap between Boatman and Below Sea Level is enormous. It's almost 10 years.
So if you can tell us too about A, this gap, and B, about the relationship with these people in Below Sea Level, and then we will also show a clip from Below Sea Level.
Well, after I made Boatman, which was at the time was very successful, the film. It went all over the world. It won a lot of awards. It became a kind of a reference on documentary, that film, because there was an intimacy, and yet it broke completely with the language of ethnographic film. It was personal, but I was not forward. I disappear from that. I wanted that frame to become the point of view of the people watching. That's when I say to find the distance was very important for me, and that's where I learned that by making that film. And after I make Boatman, I thought that everything I had to say was there. I didn't have the need anymore to make another film. I was impossible for me to conceive the world that was not in black and white, because that film has a very specific purpose why it was in black and white. And so for years I tried to find another way of narration. I had to go somewhere else after this film, and it took me really 10 years to immerse myself to another project, which was a project I wanted to do on the desert of United States. I wanted to find that again, that invisible element, that border, that invisible border, which was the desert. And it was a project in between Boatman, below sea level, there were other projects. Was like a film that I wanted to start was called Tales of Natural Disaster. It was like following a hurricane or natural disaster and going places where the hurricane or disaster were hitting, and then try to find story which were like daily story. But that was an impossible project without a budget. I never had any budget to make my film at the beginning, because I always thought that was for me to write. I mean, if you don't write a film, it's impossible to have a budget for a film. And at least I knew that was a condition that was like condemning me of just become a producer of my own film. Because I thought always that writing a documentary was like starting with a lie. And I always refused to pitch my work, to pitch my film, because I didn't know what my film was going to be. So it has this very painful gap between these two films. And then when I started Below Sea Level, there were already passages of film that somehow collapsed because of lack of money. I started this big project and I never had the money to finish. And then one day I ended up in this microcosm, which was somehow the synthesis of what I was looking for years in this immense territory of United States, telling the story of the desert, of the people living in the desert. I find this community in Slab City, which somehow was the synthesis of all my research I did for years, and I was never able to arrive to an end on that. And in this place, again, with no money, with no budget, with no sense of what was happening, I was almost at the verge of collapsing personally in my life. And I'm thinking, that was a place where people that lost everything were going. And it's a place where people don't ask any question why you're here. And I went there and I spent with my camper. I had this little camper, and I went to this place and spent months in this community without asking questions, without nobody asking me who I were, what I was doing. And then again, there was an encounter there with the Kenny Bass, and I started taking out my camera there and started filming that, and that became another long process of 2-3 years work, where I really literally lived in this community, and where the film somehow shaped itself and become alive after again another long process of interaction with the community and gaining the trust within this community. I was a total outsider, and this community was extremely on the edge of the world. Was like almost the last post of freedom in the United States. Is a place that had no policemen, no firemen, no any structure that is resembling to a community. You're an individual there, you're alone, and if you make a mistake, you pay for it. And slowly, I put myself within this community, and that's when the film came out, and all these years of basically living there and spending time with the people I met in all this year.
I would like to show a clip from Below Sea Level. Below Sea Level is the encounter of Gianfranco with different characters in Slab City, one of which is a war veteran, Cindy, that decided to then go under the name of Cindy and having a nail salon. And there is a very important scene that we're going to watch, and then Gianfranco maybe will tell us more about intimacy, about how you can be respectful of certain dynamic without intruding, but after also being able to documenting a life that is that doesn't want to be documented, because for what I understand, talking to you and watching the film and reading, they were completely there to live outside society. So to accept that someone would come in and tell a story about them, it's very interesting. But after this clip, we can continue to talk about Below Sea Level.
I'm really used to a shorter wig. However, This was a gift from a friend, and I'm not kidding you. It's like I love it. We used to do a shorter way, but I'm not kidding you. This is so outrageous. It's like, oh my God. Nothing should be perfect. Everything should have a little bit of. Nothing should be perfect. I know you probably don't mean anything to anybody else, but I'm telling you, it's like, my God, when I put you on, it's like you're just part of me. And it's wonderful, God, it's so wonderful. I'm just going to try to feather you a little bit. All right. Let's see what it looks like. Now is when the telling is.
This is interesting, the journey of this film, no? Because this film you presented, if I remember, in Venice, and you won Orizzonti with this film. Then this film, that clearly it's a film that there is empathy just coming off the screen. You can tell that there is, like, you know, a level of intimacy that I would like to dwell on for a while.
Yes,
And
there
yet,
are 8, 9 characters in this film which are extremely strong. It's like, for me, when I was there, it was like reading or listening Whitman and Thoreau, because that the language was incredible of all of the character. When you read the whole transcription of the script, it's like literally reading Whitman or Thoreau poetry. And the language of the film is extremely beautiful, of the people that are there, and extremely poetic and extremely intimate. And this was a world that America didn't want to see. I mean, this film I thought was going to be in America a big success, and the film was basically censorship in America. It went all over the world, and it didn't have a single screening in the States.
that's it's very interesting as point of view, no? That the idea.
And
that
now, like last year, there was a film which somehow tells the story of this Margin, what was called the film that won the Oscar.
No Manland.
Nomadland.
I guess you're referring to Nomadland.
Yeah.
But
And,
yes,
And somehow it's like she puts a lot of water on that stories, and it's like that world, but without the truth that
But
belong to
do you
that
think
place.
that
And
yes, do you think that in this sense,
and that what the America didn't want to accept at the time, because this is the America that brought to Trump.
but because you were the outsider, do you think for them? So we're talking about agency here. Do you think that somehow made your film not as well received as others, or why do you think that was not accepted? When you say was not accepted,
It was not accepted because when the film came out, Obama was just elected as the president, and people didn't want to face this reality. And this was the collapse of America somehow. This was the margin of America. This was an America that people didn't want to see. And this is the America that somehow that now has a voice, and that Trump was able to somehow refer to this extreme side of America. And so probably this film came out too early, and it was a too early film. And as I said, the film was completely censorship in the States, and it was very painful. Now the film has its own voice there, like university things. I know that when I was just at Harvard a few weeks ago, where I did a masterclass, it was on this film. So the film is coming out again, having his own life, because nothing changed since then. It's exactly the same communities, the same things, the same spirit. The film, I think, came out too many years earlier, and it was completely censorship. And again, the film didn't have a single screening in the States, which was amazing somehow.
I would like to continue this journey, as it is your journey as a filmmaker, like, you know, but staying in US and moving, as I said, on the other side of the US-Mexican border. So we moved from this ensemble of protagonists, which was below sea level, and we are catapulted with El Sicario, room 164, in a context of you locked in a hotel room with a killer that was anonymous at the time, and an interview with this man. Before
a confession.
A confession. I would say that before that we will go through El Sicario, I would love to see the clip that somehow it will set the mood, because it's quite an incredible film, and I'm always surprised to read that we also directly from you that you pick El Sicario as sometimes maybe you change your mind as, about the fact that it's your favorite work, El Sicario. Maybe you can tell us more when we see the clip.
La función de un sicario es acabar con una persona de forma inmediata, ya sea por medio de un balazo, cuchillada o un golpe tan certero que nada va a sentir más que eso. La forma en un carro. Cuando un sicario es un profesional, no hace lo que hace cualquier imitador a sicario. Este es un carro. El objetivo va manejando y hay que matarlo. Un imitador hace esto. Escupe todo el carro. Cuando un sicario trabaja y tiene un objetivo y va manejando, y este es el objetivo, son dos formas muy sencillas. Hace un círculo aquí, donde es la chapa del carro, o hace un círculo en el vidrio, donde es la cabeza del objetivo. Ese es un sicario. Los demás son imitadores.
It's hard, to talk. I tend to forget about all my work always, because otherwise I'm not able to go forward. And it's hard to talk now in the synthesis about this, because we can talk for 1 hour about the Sicario. And
Let's
again,
do
probably
10 minutes.
nobody saw the Sicario here in this room.
Anyone saw Sicario in this room?
I mean,
no,
even more.
yeah, it's a good...
more audience. And well, Sicario, it's a perfect film. It cost $3,000 to do it.
Really?
2 days of work,
Fantastic.
and it was extremely successful.
I mean, what else can you ask?
Few days of my life, a few $1,000. No, I'm joking, but Sicario, it was a film that, all my films, they last forever, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years. It's like an endless process of immersion. And this film, it comes from a relationship that I had so close to my tutor. It was a person that I met during Below Sea Level, Charles Bowden. He is probably he was, unfortunately he died of heart attack, smoking cigarettes. He always used to say, "Who wants to die with a healthy body?" Like 3 pack of cigarettes a day, and then he died with a unhealthy body. But I met him. I have to talk about Charles, because Charles Bowden, when I was doing Below Sea Level and I was in a total crisis of this film, I heard him talking at the radio at NPR, talking about the desert, talking about the profound element of the America I was searching. And I was in my camper. I was in Nevada. I just finished a shooting there, and I hear this radio, and I stopped and I record all this conversation with him. And he was talking about his books, and I started reading all his books. I went and stopped by in San Francisco, read his books, and then one day I said, I have to call this man. And this is the beauty in America. I just did 9/11, whatever information, and I said, I'm looking for a man called Charles Bowden in Arizona, Tucson, Arizona. And said, well, you have 2 Charles Bowden. He gave me the number, and I called him. And I introduced myself, and he was like, okay, are you from Italy? I said, yes, I'm from. Can you cook? I said, yes, I can cook. Well, come by, we meet. And I went from Arizona to Tucson with my camper. I arrived to his door with all my food and things. I introduced myself, and we spent like 10 days together talking about everything. And we became extremely close, very good friends. And this relationship went on throughout the making of Below Sea Level. He was the one that came to Rome and saw 80 hours of footage and you have a damn good film, you have to edit this. It's a fantastic film about America, and he gave me the drive to finish that film, Below Sea Level. And then our relationship became very important and very strong. And one day I said, Charles, let's do a film together. After Louisiana, after the disaster there, I said, I come there, I want to make a film about, I'm writing a story about corruption and police and things in Louisiana, in New Orleans. So come with me, and we spend time together. We try to find the subject and work together on the subject. And after spending a few weeks together, going from place to place, trying to find the story, this was for me an incredible opportunity of always immersing myself in such an enormous closeness with American culture, and he was really always opening my mind in so many different directions. And one day I was in my hotel room, and he came, he just wrote this Harper's Magazine. There was this story about the Sicario, a story that he wrote. It was an incredible story. There were like 20 pages interview with this Sicario, and I was amazed. And I said, Charles, I want to make this film. And he said, well, I don't think it's possible. The guy doesn't want to be filmed. And then we went again for 1 month. We wrote a subject for a possible film. And when I went back to Italy, one day he called me and he said, I have a good news for you. The Sicario is allowing you to film. I warranty for you, there's only one problem. You have to pay him. I said, why? Well, the wife is pregnant. He's having a child. He needs $2,000 for the birth. And I said, well, it's not good to start like this, to meet him and give him money. But he said something very strong. He said, I used to ask $2,000 to kill people, to shoot people, and I want $2,000 for you to shoot me.
It's a good
So I said, this at least makes sense. So there's a kind of correspondence. And I remember I found this, my editor, Jacob, gave me the $2,000. I found the camera. I had to go to do a master class in Mexico City at the institution. There was like I went there. From there I flew to Arizona with this camera, with this $2,000 in my pocket, met the Sicario, spent with him 1 day, being in that room alone, he said, that's where I want to shoot, in this room. And I said, why this room? And Charles said to me, if you choose this room, has a meaning. And then that room somehow was the room of death, you know, where that was a room where we were torturing people. That was the room where, and I spent it with him. He said, just wait for me here. I will be back. I don't know when, but I will be back. And I spent 1 week there waiting for him. And one morning, he knocked at the door. He was there. He was ready to film. And in that week, I decided to find the narrative tools. How I'm going to film this guy. And I remember I had always with me this notepad and a Sharpie pen. And I said, okay, he's a graphomanist, so I have to film him when he's writing. And I gave him a book. I gave him a chair where he sits. And that's when the film started. It was like a 2-hour. I remember I shot like it was a cassette. I shot one cassette there from one position. And that was the wrong position because all was upside down and we saw it. So I put myself there. At a certain point, I couldn't move from that frame. So the whole story, I shot it from the completely wrong frame. And I was there looking inside the camera for 2 hours where he was talking and writing. He never stopped once. It was like totally like a river.
Stream of ocean.
Stream of ocean without, and I couldn't interrupt him. And then I say, fuck, you know, I shot completely all the film upside down. Basically, he's here writing, I'm there with the camera. And the whole film was like basically upside down, but I couldn't stop. And then the next day I asked him, I said, my editor's gonna kill me. I cannot go with one take of someone talking upside down. So the next day I asked him if he could go through all these notes and tell me what was. So I did another shoot with him describing all these notes, and that's it. So I were like 2 shots basically. And I went back to Rome and started editing the film. And then I knew there was a lot of things missing there. And I asked if I could go back again, meeting him, because he was talking about the places torture people. So when I went there, I asked him to meet again. He accepted. And then there was another step of the reenactment inside this room. So basically it's a film that was shot in 3 moments, 1 shot, 2 shot, and then the reenactment. And I spent it also in Juarez 2-3 months filming all the disasters that were happening there in the city. And I had incredible footage there, following the journalists, the things. And when I thought that this was going to be very useful on the editing, and when we were trying to insert this element, which didn't belong to this room was like a perfect stage, you know, it was a perfect, so it was impossible to put these shots inside. And at the ending, at least, there are like 3 moments in this film. So 1 from here, 1 from there, and his reenactment. So it's a film that somehow is very poor, but for me it's the most cinematic film I did it, because when you see this film, I think it has the tension and the narration of all the element that cinema requires, you know, like the element of language that cinema gives, and it's all there for me.
And there's also, you know, now that before you were talking about the relationship that the camera itself instigates, no, the presence of the camera and the performance of the self. We were talking also with Roberto Minervini at the beginning of this day. He was saying, he was also like, you know, sharing this point of view, saying the camera needs to provoke something, and the performance of the self, it's something, and even if you are performing, it's fine, you know. And definitely, you know, there was some level of performance in the killer that you intercepted, and I guess that you felt comfortable
what I
with.
say, no matter when you put the camera, there's a change in the relationship. The camera, it does change. So that's why I never understand this element of the truth, of the observation. You know, for me, the camera is an element of separation completely, and something else, it comes out when the camera is there. So I don't believe on this fact that the camera is putting you on the pureness of things, unless you're doing, but even when you do an interview, you choose a location, you choose a moment, you put a light, you put a person sitting there, you ask questions to the person. So there's always an intrusion on that. And it's like Eschilo used to say, you know, the perfect actor is the one that is not conscious of the fact that he's acting. And this is the same for me. Everybody who's in front of the camera is somehow performing something. Then I have to be in the place of a psychologist, where you have to capture the truth, you know, like psychology with the patient. It doesn't have to ask himself, is he telling the truth or not, but what is the element of the narration that is important in order to hold elements that are a part of the truth. And that's for me what is important. And I never feel that the camera, I never understand why documentary has to be, when the camera moves, is real, is more real. When the camera is shaking, is more real. And I never understood that, because reality doesn't move. So for me what is important is like to find a frame, and that frame has to tell that story from the beginning to the end, and then you wait for, sometimes for years. When I did Notturno, I wait for one frame for 3 years, for having that story in that frame.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have to anticipate somehow that element that is coming to you. I mean, otherwise you are like just like a dog marking a territory, pissing right and left, and then filming everywhere, and then in the editing build up a story. And for me, is a deceiving element that the camera in a documentary, because then they become a point of view of the cameraman. Because if I'm there, if I'm here, as I keep moving, it's not anymore the viewer, but becomes someone else making you go through this itinerary. And for me, it's always very important when I put the camera to disappear, and having the audience be able to immerse in that frame, and becoming interactive with that space, and fulfill what was the gap that are not there, you know, through his own culture, through his own interaction, through his own things. So that's for me what I want to do. It's like filming silence. It's like filming the space between a note and another note. That's what is the most important element for me. There's a note, and that note belongs to another note. But what is between these notes is the space that is more important than the note itself, or as important as the note itself. So when I'm filming, it's important to find always that space that is between one note and another note, and this is a space of silence that you have to be able to carry on in your frame, in your decision, in your relationship with the person. That's why for me, the biggest investment for me is time. The time of my film is the time of the relationship I can install with who I'm filming. And this is like on both levels it goes, as a trust. That's why I film alone, because in that way I'm able to create this intimacy. I will not be able ever to be with a crew when I'm filming. I have one assistant when I work, which is with me and become part of my way. He knows when to step out, when to be there, when to move away, and leaving me alone, because I have to have this intimacy with the camera and with what I'm filming, and this gave me also the freedom to stay months, weeks, years, to wait for that moment that will happen. I know will happen in front of the frame, because that moment is something I already lived with the person, because I spent so much time before that when I decided to put the camera, there's a rituality on people that you have to be able to anticipate when the camera is there, and that for me becomes the moment of truth. That for me becomes the moment of universality.
And it's, you know, and also in this, there is a research that leads to those moments, but your cinema is also a moment of capturing a glimpse. Often what I see in your films is what I feel in your films, but I don't see in the frame. You place an important emphasis on what is left out. So my question to you in terms of methodology is, do you ever feel that a fear of missing out on what, because you decide to shoot only in a certain moment where you feel that intimacy is built, in this way there is a lot that will be left out. I imagine that a lot of stories in below sea level did not make into the film.
Well, in any film, there's most of the story that they leave before start filming are necessary out. But the fact that you have the camera allowed me then to have that intimacy that I'm sure that even what is left out is there in that frame. And it's part of that, because when there is that frame, it contains also what is left out physically, but also what is left out of a frame. I think photography is an incredible challenge, to put a frame. It's put a frame. It's an ethical, political choice, no matter what. The distance you put between your camera and the character is an ethical choice. If I film you from here, when I see a film, after 3 minutes, I immediately understand where the film is going by the frame, by the distance. But where is the camera? I remember when I was doing NYU, and I had Scorsese. He used to come. He was not a teacher, but somehow he did a lot of
mentorship,
guest lecturing there. And I remember always he said, "There's like thousands of points you can choose with your camera, millions of points you can choose with your camera, but only one is right." And that's, for me, it was very important. There's only one frame that is the right frame. And to find that frame is the big challenge always, because that's what is, when I talked before, I'm not interested between documentary and fiction. I'm interested between true and false. And that camera, that distance, that perception, that angle, that highness that you choose with the camera, and there where you create the truthfulness of what you say. And that's, for me, is the big challenge in every film. And unfortunately, to do this, you have to have a lot of time and a lot of time spending there. You have to choose a location, you have to choose an absolute, you have to choose that place, and that place has to have a person that lives in that place, and that person has to represent what that place it means. So there's so many elements that they go together, and all this has to become part of the narration. And then what you're going to ask to this person, what you want to this person, what you want this person to be. And the truth that as a documentarist, because I am a documentarist, the truth is the essence of who is this person I'm filming. And my job is to become as close as possible of what I perceive is the person I have in front of me. Could be a Sicario, could be the last person, could be in any situation. When I put a frame, there's an enormous moral and political and ethical element, and that is a huge decision.
And when you decide to go back to Rome, for Sacro GRA, as I mentioned, was the first.
You make it fast like this.
Well, it's. Do you want to say a bit more on?
No, because there's so many things pass by before one film. Like, can we talk what happened between?
And then, well, not that less than what passed between Boatman and below sea level, because you fast forward a couple of years, you go back to Italy. Rome is the city where, when you are in Italy, you live. It's a city that you know, and yet you create this portrait that is in Sacro GRA. In a way, it's a film in structure similar to Below Sea Level, no? In the sense that there are different characters that help the viewer, the spectator, to understand the GRA. What is the GRA? The GRA is this ring that is around the city of Rome that acts as a wall that, in a moment, separates you from the city. Another moment of the day connects you to the city, thinking also of the daily workers.
It's the biggest highway in Europe around the city, the GRA. It's a perfect circle around the city, and is the nightmare of every Roman that has to go through this ring in order to go from place to place. It's a perfect separation. It's like a wall, basically, that surround the city of Rome. So there is a Rome that is inside the GRA, and there's a Rome that is outside the GRA. And the Rome inside the GRA is like 250,000 people maybe, and the Rome outside the GRA is like 3 million people. And so the Rome is really, the GRA is really a division there. It's like the ring of Saturn, you know, like I say at the beginning of the film. And it's another place where people don't want to stop. That's a place you just go from one exit to another exit. And I allowed myself to spend 2 years, 3 years in this place, living again in a camper and living there. But it was a painful moment in my life when I just got separated and things. So that became my home. And it became so much another, so far away. I'm not Roman. And so for me, the GRA was just a place to go to the airport, to go from the center of Rome to the airport. And when I started leaving, that reality of Rome became something else. It was really like being in another planet. And I remember at the beginning, I took a class. I was teaching in Switzerland, in Geneva, and I took all my class there for 2-3 months. There were like 8 students. And I did short film around this place. And that for me was a way to get in touch with that reality. And I forced them to stay like, probably 1 month there without going ever to the center of Rome. And then I said, nobody has to move from here. So this became somehow like a mental space, became something else, became something that I didn't have any more contact with the city of Rome. And sometimes I say, I go to Rome tomorrow. But Rome was like that. I was in Rome. Rome was like 20 minutes to drive, 15, just to go to the center of Rome. But that became for me another, to transform a place in something else, become this suspension from the city. It became the story of the people I met in these 3 years, and it became somehow an element of like a centripetal force of like those years, La Grande Bellezza came out. La Grande Bellezza is like the Great Beauty was a forza centrifuga at the inside Rome, and the film is a forza centripeta, which take you outside in this ring, which somehow the people I met they had an incredible force and reality. Unfortunately, again, the film is not seen here. But
it was seen here, though.
Yeah.
4 years ago, we had a full retrospective of all Gianfranco films.
Yeah.
So I hope someone in the audience already saw Sacro GRA, but in fact, I would like to show a clip because there were amazing, peculiar characters or pairs of characters in Sacro GRA from different, pockets of this ring. And we are going to see 2 of them. It's a very peculiar relationship. So please, if you can play the clip of Sacro GRA, it would be great.
Ma sai che osservavo che, non lo so, queste case sono abitate?
Quali?
Queste qui.
Le villette?
Sì, le villette. C'è
Queste qua
nessuno.
davanti o quelle là?
Qui ieri sera c'era la luce, sai questa casottina che hanno
Ah sì,
costruito?
sono pigliate perché a volte per
Questa
cancellare...
sì, però quelle là non c'è mai luce. Mai
Si
niente.
vede che non sono ciecati come me, che infatti ho bisogno di scendere
Ma
la
no,
luce.
ma non me lo dire, scusami, non è possibile. Quando una casa è occupata e abitata, una qualche luce si vede, non che io ci passi le serate a controllare, però sicuramente qualcosa vedresti.
It's also really interesting on your point of view, your mission with your subjects, and yet there is a total sense of truth coming out of this scene.
this is a story that was shot on a building, and I discovered these windows, and the whole apartment basically was one room. So there were 6 apartments or 8 apartments, and each apartment was just one little room. And when I discovered this, I started knocking the door of all these people, and they all allowed me to film there. And I spent again months, but just from outside in this scala di, come si chiama,
outside the
no,
stairs.
the emergency
stairs.
emergency. So the whole this episode was all shot from all different
That side.
So you have all these stories, layers, on this. So there was one episode, and he was fantastic. This man, he was a noble man that lost everything in his life, and living with his daughter in this tiny, tiny little room like this. And there was a world there, the way he's interacting with outside himself. So the whole story basically comes from one frame, and I follow him for months, years. And what comes out is like an incredible, again, intimacy with, but I never went inside that apartment when I shot. And this, again, is about the invisible limit, invisible border, you know, the film. It's about stratification of memory. It's about the edge of the frame that brings you to this story that are so intimate and yet connected to a city, which is, but at the end, also those borders, these old areas that they become one place. And I remember when I was editing the film, it was so difficult to create this idea of this huge place that has so many identity and so many different structure. And on the editing, I could not put together all this film. And then one day I met Nicolini, who was the architect. And he told me, Gianfranco, the only way you can edit this film is if you can open this circle and you create like one infinity line. And but you have to open that and create like a mental space there. And that's, for me, gave me the idea. It then became like a village. It lost the connection with Rome and became this microcosm where there was a church, where there was a building, where there was an ambulance, where all the characters that were there was created this very tiny, small place, which was, again, a mental place. And that's when I was able to somehow edit the film, you know, when I was able to open this circle in this infinity line and created this microcosm of intimacy somehow. And again, this took years to make this film, and I lived really there in a van, in a car, and in a location that became one of the important locations of the film.
I'm of course also conscious of time and also conscious of the promise that I made to all of you of open up to the floor, but I wanted to address with Gianfranco, and then we'll come to you, the final two works before also then going to see Notturno, because Fire at Sea, that was made in 2016, and Notturno in 2020 are somehow like, you know, complementary, especially in relation to the point of view. Fire at Sea was conceived out of your necessity of going to Lampedusa, which is a very small island, which is almost closer to Tunisia than Italy, that was for a long while a border where the first wave of migrants would come, find shelter, sometimes continuing their trips, and you went there to find migrants, but you went there and perhaps you didn't find the migrants.
There's a very bad sign here. I saw my daughter leaving. So if she's leaving, it means like...
well, it could be us, like, you know, something else. Father-daughter relationship.
I lost my daughter.
Do you want to text her?
No.
So Fire at Sea, you went there. It really stayed with you, this scene.
No, because I really feel like it's not easy to talk about filming such a small moment.
I know, you would love 6 hours.
No, when most of the people didn't see the film, so it's hard to
How many people see Fire at Sea? Come on.
Yeah, but still. But no, I know what we are talking is like about more like a process.
The overarch. It's a glimpse into your...
Which again, it doesn't change for me from film to film, from Boatman to the last film. The process is always the same. You know, for me the big challenge is to find that invisible border and that element of transformation of that reality in something else that creates suspension. Now, the biggest challenge for me in Notturno, it was, which is the film I don't know if you have the patience to sit down for one and a half hour after all this, but there is the film Notturno, which is the last film. And so Notturno somehow is like the ending point of all this process of Boatman, Sacro GRA, And still, Notturno was again finding a language, the territory. All the films that take place in very small area. You know, even Boatman is like a small place, and Lampedusa, a tiny island where the immigrants were arriving from a place marked by war, by things, and I'm there. Again, there's the protagonist, which become the metaphor of the whole film. This kid that has Samuele, that has a lazy eyes, and then that point of view becomes somehow our point of view. So there's always this process of creating a very strong relationship between the person and the interaction that I have with that person in order to create that reality. In Notturno, it was very difficult because I started and was from countries that have so much different history, interaction, religion, layers of contradiction that they go on years and years, from the colonial time to the time now, the revolution, the inner war, the Shia, the Sunni. That is like such an enormous amount of information, and be able to go through this, the ISIS crisis, to go through all this territory, where the territory of ISIS there, where ISIS somehow for years created a border that was really a border between life and death. And I did all this border in these years, and at the end, the big challenge of the film was like to break out this border. So for me, what was important was like the encounter that I had in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Kurdistan, and at the end make a film that you don't know anymore where you are.
Yeah.
But what is important is like to be carried by the story I met that were there. You know, so the border that usually is a place of separation, for me became a moment of encounter, and that's where the film starts, with this encounter. And for me, it was not important anymore to say where it was, that situation, that story, because at the end, the pain that all these people I met sharing, it has no border whatsoever. So this was the big challenge of the film, you know, to film a reality which was so immense and so huge, and then created this world, which again became like a mental space, became a place where what is important is the relationship that I was able to create with the people I met in all this year.
And and I would like just to say one more thing about Notturno. If you can, Notturno, the title, you know, the lack of light. So you went there and shot, like, you know, of course, day and night. But can you tell me more about, like, you know, your relationship with the light, especially in this work?
Well, when I started this film, I knew that I was facing a world that I didn't know. I was facing language that I didn't talk. I was facing culture that I knew just about information, very superficial information from news, from reading, or from things. So I thought when I started the film, this film had to be a film shot all at night, because at night the lack of light was somehow a protection for me. At night, a snake can be a stick, and a stick can be a snake. There's a moment of where things somehow overlap. And that's when I started the film, somehow, to shoot the film at night, where I was able to not to go so close to things, and created somehow a suspension on that. And then the need became to start seeing it, so I started filming on the twilight zone, you know, like during the sunrise and the sunset. And then when I had more time I was spending, and more need there was to go out of this darkness, of these things. And when I went out, I was not able to film with the harsh light of the day, so the big challenge became to film with clouds. The clouds was again another protection, but I realized that was a protection that, again, from what we talked before, the clouds was allowing me to put my camera in 360 degree and be able to find the right frame always, because, you know, the clouds, most of my film, there are clouds there, but then I find why is there. And because with the clouds, I'm able really to move 360 degree without having the sun or waiting, changing the light. It becomes like another protection, which is somehow allowed me to have that famous distance that I was talking to you before, that famous frame that is the right frame to tell the story. So waiting for the light, waiting for the clouds, waiting for the clouds somehow to become part of the narration was another big challenge on this film here. So sometimes I waited for weeks, sometimes for months, sometimes for years to have that frame that was somehow allowing me to enter in the story and somehow create this world that is so brutally shaken and come si dice sgretolato and crumbly by what's happening, in all these years there, but yet giving the story to the people I met in all these years that I spent there.
Great. If we can bring the lights of the house up, and is there any question for Gianfranco? There is definitely one at the front, and then we have one at the very front, and then one there. We will take a couple of questions, and then we will go straight on to the Notturno.
Hi, and thank you very much. My question is brief. While filming, you repeatedly refer to finding the frame, the right frame. Do you ever have second thoughts while you are there on location, ready to film, having selected, let's say, the frame in your mind? Probably there is a lot that has happened before, as you said, but do you ever have second thoughts, or that probably you could be doing something else there on the location because of everything going around at the same time, depending, of course, on the location?
No, constantly, yeah, because when you have one frame, you're missing some other things. But then the challenge is when I was with the Sicario, that I knew I started filming with the wrong frame, and then I was stuck there, and I hold the whole frame, but then that frame became the film. So also when I film and I decide to have that frame there, or maybe do little movement, I know that I'm missing other things. But the big challenge is always to wait and know that in that moment something will happen within the frame. Because again, otherwise you start moving right and left, and you lose. The more you move, the more you lose the essence of it. So the big thing is always to hold that. And then, of course, once you have that moment covered, then you move the camera somewhere else, and you know that something else is going on, but then you put the camera there, and again you wait that something happen and cover you that moment. So there's always this interaction between looking what's happening around you, be there and waiting for what is in front of you, and once you have covered that moment, go fast to another frame and cover the other frame. But otherwise, if you keep moving free, that's why I like to have a heavy camera and a heavy tripod. So this anchor me into a place, and doesn't allow me to, just move like this, freedom. So it's always a very strong yes, no, I move, no, I stay, I wait, no, I move, this is wrong, oh no, this is right, perfect, so this is good. So there's a constant word that goes there. It's a completely interaction constantly between what's going around you, what you think you're missing, and what you think is worth it to be there in order to be captured. So it's a constant battle and fight.
Great.
Was there a question there as well?
Can I just add very quickly?
Very quickly.
Yeah, very quickly. To say that when I watched Sacro GRA, because I saw you're concerned about the audience not having watched the films, I watched it in my tiny room in London. My editor suggested to watch that film, and it was a late Saturday night, asking my girlfriend to watch it with her. She fell asleep in the film, thankfully, because by the end of the film, I was so immersed into the film. I had drunk a bottle of whiskey, and I was crying by myself watching the film. And then next day, my girlfriend asked me how was the film, and I just couldn't describe it. I said, I'm sorry, you have to watch it again. So it was really...
Were you sober the second time when you watched it?
Sorry?
Were you sober the second time when you watched it?
Myself?
Film?
Yeah, I tried to stay. But I was so moved.
Thank you. We go there.
How much time do you spend with your characters to prevent them from sort of performing? Because I feel like, you know, you've spoken quite a lot about how the camera obviously changes your subject. I imagine often you may see the subjects, you want to work with them, and then you bring the camera out and they change. What do you do to prevent them from acting too much?
Well, I spend a lot of time first without the camera with them, and then when the camera is there, I think when I take out the camera is because I think it's the moment when they forgot about me and they forgot they're like doing something. Because, you know, there's a moment when I bring the camera also there, and I don't film. The camera is there, and I don't film, but the camera is there, so it becomes like another step that. So they get used to the camera. And for me, what is important is that they keep doing what they would do in a daily life completely. And then, of course, when the camera is there, things change. But things change for both. And that element of change is when cinema calls, you know. But doesn't mean that they're acting for me. The only thing that I want to do is like either look at me, and then my duty is like to follow that. And at a certain point, people forget that the camera is there. You know, forget that there is that separation. And of course, maybe they wouldn't do what they're doing in that moment if the camera was not there. But this is another problem. This doesn't concern me. The important thing is like what happens there always belongs to their life and to their moment and to their intimacy and to their process of daily life. That for me what is important. And if it doesn't work, I go back. Well, there's a moment, there's this tree with Ali, who is one of the main person, who then become a character in the film. And I spent months in this tree, because that was the tree he was going to hunt, to play, to hide. And, I was going there, nothing was happening. The camera was there, maybe I pretend I film, I don't film anything. Because also if I shoot in digital, I always think that I have film inside. So I never shoot just to shoot. When I shoot, it's because I think it's worth to have that frame occupied inside the camera and be part of that. So it becomes really going back always to the same location, to certain point something extremely unexpected happened. There's a moment in this tree when there is a huge storm, and that storm brings the story forward somewhere else, you know. And again, it's the patient to go always in the same location, in the same room, in the same space. And the time of the film is the time really of the relationship that creates between me and the person the camera, and me and the camera and the person. So it's a long process always. I never tell what to do, but somehow anticipate what they're doing. And I go back always in the same place, and there's always a rituality. There's always something that happened in the same way, and I have to be able somehow to anticipate that moment. And then sometimes you don't even anticipate because something is happening which is so strong outside that creates a moment that nobody were expecting, and that is the moment of truth that happened, because things are so fast that happen. It's this incredible storm where he's moving, the camera is filming, and he's being himself on that moment, that I have to capture that moment of intimacy. So that becomes a third level of interaction there, because I cannot say do this or do that, but somehow I have to move with what the person is doing that moment. And of course he's probably know that I'm filming, because maybe he would go somewhere else, but and that's what is interesting for me, and that's where cinema comes there, and that's where the camera becoming protagonist, and that's where the unawareness of acting is there, and that's when you choose the person that is in front of the camera. It's the most important choice, because that choice you carry on with you forever, for 3 years, for when the film is finished. And it's like doing a cast, when you choose. But for me, that moment has always a moment of very strong attraction there. And I know that there is something very strong that I identify very, very much on that, and that I have to carry on with me. But most of the film I do, once I start the film when I have the whole idea or who is going to be the protagonist of the film. In Notturno, I spent months without filming, but when I started filming, I had all the story, one in Iraq, one in Sudan, one in Syria, one in Kurdistan, and I had all this story that I built and that I start following throughout these years. And sometimes you spend, you have also very important things to be able to leave at a certain point, because nothing's going to happen. So you leave and you pass to another story, you spend time to another place, which is like 3 hours plane from the location you were before. And then after 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, you go back to the story and something else, because the life goes on. And life is infinity, and when you put that frame, you froze that moment of life. And sometimes time passes, like from one story to another story. There's a story with the phone. That was the first story I encountered in Notturno. And the end of that story, it just happened after 3 years. So it was 3 years I waited for that moment to happen. And that was the moment that was fundamental to create that relationship. So it's a very subtle way of moving, knowing when you have to arrive to a place, and knowing when you have to leave, and know when you have to go back and grab again that story. But the interesting part is that when you go back for 6 months, a lot of things happen there. So there's also a change on the person you're filming. But that change becomes another element of narration, which is bring you the film to another level. If you spend 1 week, nothing happened. But if you spend 3 years, 4 years there, people's lives change. And if you try to somehow grab that moment of change, then become part of your narration. When I started the film in Lampedusa, I met Samuele. Samuele was a kid with the passion of he had to be a fisherman, but he wanted to be a hunter. And in these 3 years, suddenly he developed a lazy eye, so went to the doctor. So this lazy eye became part of the story. So if I were there only for 1 week, 1 month, nothing would have happened. But in 3 years, so many things happened to his life that the change that happened to his life became the strong change on the narrative of the film. So this is what is important for me also, to have to wait for change that happened and to be able to grab this change and bring it into the film and being part of the narration and being part of the final structure of the film.
Well, Gianfranco, on the note of knowing when it's time to leave, I want to thank you so much. Please join me in putting your hand together for Gianfranco Rosi.
Thank you.